In this lesson, we're going to finish prepping the background in Photoshop and then bring it into After Effects and start laying things out. The first big step that we go through is expanding the canvas and increasing the size of some of the layers so that we have more to work with when actually animating the camera. And then I move into showing you how to set up the camera and start spacing layers apart in the Z plane so that you can start adding some depth to your scenes. Now, there is something I need to warn you about before you get too far into this lesson. Is at the end of lesson 203, I realized that my camera is super telephoto. So it's a really long lens, and I'd intended for a much wider lens. So when you are setting up your cameras, make sure you're using something around the like 35 to 50 millimeter range, or that you have about 35 to 45 degree angle of view. This will save you the headache that I have to go through of actually fixing and adjusting all the layers. I am, however, keeping all of these mistakes in the video. I know that might be frustrating for some of you guys, but it's really important because you might do it one day and you're going to have to know how to fix it. I should have realized that all the layers were looking really small and really spaced apart. They shouldn't be that spaced apart necessarily unless you're intending to have a really tight shot. So I do go through the process. I think it'll be in lesson 204 that I go through the process of fixing it. So both this lesson 202 and lesson 203 have the mistake in it, and I realize it at the end of lesson 203, and then 204 we're going to go through the process of fixing it, which isn't too crazy, but it is good stuff to know. So if you guys do bear with me, you can either watch this or you can just wait till lesson 204 comes out, see how we fix the problem, and then in 205 we'll be back on track, building the scene as intended. Okay, so we're here back in Photoshop with the Rocket Randee background composition. And what I've just done here is I've increased the canvas size probably by about 10%. The reason I'm doing this is because my ground pieces and my trees, I don't have enough to actually work with. The tree foliage doesn't have any tops on it, so I can't move the camera up above the trees at all. And these ground pieces here, like these hills in the distance, they're so small that if I move the camera too much, it's very likely that I'll actually reveal the layers and how small they are. So I need something more to work with. The other good thing about making your pieces larger is that you can reuse them differently. So if there's a nice curve on a hill piece, and I would even suggest making them bigger and more curved, I can actually rotate it slightly and use it many times over and over again. Because you'll find as you're actually putting the scene in After Effects, if you really want to give it a lot of depth, you're going to want to reuse a lot of pieces. And you'll see what I'm saying once we get into After Effects with this. Now, ultimately, I should have done this earlier in the concept art. But because it was concept art, I wasn't really planning on using it specifically for After Effects. I wasn't sure how far I would take it. But really, this stage of expanding everything should have happened before all of the color correction work and the texturing. Now here I'm just taking one of the paper textures and doubling it up and desaturating it so I can actually use it on the hills again, because the texture I had on there just wasn't big enough, and stamping the whole thing wasn't actually going to work. So here I'm bringing in full sheets of new texture and just applying it. And here I'm expanding another hill piece. I have to expand the color gradient on everything. It's actually super tedious. I really should have done it differently. This very same problem happened when I was actually working on the pipelines animation with the little girl character. And the client was really nervous about this paper look that I was proposing. So I had to develop the artwork really far. Like the concept art had to look exactly like the animation would look because they were so uncertain about it. And they ended up really liking it. And I was really comfortable with it. I put a lot of work into the backgrounds. So I ended up doing exactly this. I ended up having to flesh them all out, expand all the pieces, layer things that weren't originally layered properly, and retexture everything. So it's pretty tedious, but at the same time, if you can use a piece of concept art for your production, that's a pretty big time saver in itself. And it's kind of awesome because you do get to maintain the sketchy style and the illustrative quality that was part of a looser approach. I find a lot of the time when I make concept art and then I go in and create backgrounds from it, they tend to become too refined and too polished, and I lose that really great concept art style that was part of the flavor that I love so much when making animated films. And it's something that I think gets lost so often, especially in big productions. I love the concept art. I really enjoy the thumbnails, but all that stuff is lost in the actual production because once everything's polished up, it just tends to look really slick and really sharp, and it loses some of that feeling. I mean, obviously, this piece of art is guilty of that too, but at the same time, we're hanging on to the flavor of the original concept, which is pretty awesome. All right, here I'm just finishing up the foliage and painting in some tops and rounding the shapes off a little bit. This will give me the ability to reuse these shapes and, if I want, move the camera above the treetops and come down into the scene because I haven't really established what I'm doing with the camera or how I'm introducing the scene. Working this way is okay if you're doing a personal project, but working this way for a commercial production just would not be viable. There's too many questions hanging in the air right now, and there's really no reason you should be developing production art to this level and not really knowing how much of it you're going to use. So that being said, my recommendation for even doing personal projects would be planning the story out a little bit more, having a sense of where it's going, and then developing your concept art and developing your backgrounds and things like that. I will be revisiting some of those topics later on, but I wanted to move on from where the last series left off, and a lot of people were asking about puppets and backgrounds, so I just thought I'd go into the actual more technical side of things since there's a lot of content out there about storyboarding and storytelling and all that kind of stuff. So the final stage, once everything's set up here, is actually I reduce the very far background pieces because they actually don't have to be as big. The bigger a layer is in After Effects, the more memory it takes to render it. So for anything that's like a far background, like a sky or any like overall texture layers that I'm going to use, they really don't move that much unless you're doing a lot of tilts, like where your camera's actually rotating. But I don't usually do a lot of really heavy rotation because it reveals that everything's just flat layers. So those far background layers, they actually don't move a whole lot because the sky is fairly stationary because it's so far away. So I'll reduce the size of it down, sometimes even more than this, and that makes it a little bit easier for After Effects to render. After I've done that, I'm going through here and I'm just rasterizing all the layers, flattening them, and applying the layer masks because I want to get everything down to its simplest form. I don't want to have any effects layers or anything like that. You can have that, like I said, you can use them, but what it does do is it really does slow down the rendering process, and I find it's better to revisit them in After Effects. At this point, I've also saved a backup just in case. Really important to save backups before you start flattening everything, just in case you have to go back in and rebuild a piece. I am planning on adding some animated grass layers, so it may be necessary to go back into the original composition and erase away some of the grass. So it's really important to have these backups. Right now, I'm just saving an alternate file for After Effects, and we're going to take this PSD and start importing and adding some depth to it. Okay, so now that the Photoshop file is all ready, it's time to do one of my favorite things, is bring it into After Effects and start building the scene. You don't have to have a finished puppet in order to do this. You can work with anything really, even just a placeholder. So as long as you have the general style resolved, it's okay to start backgrounds at any time, I find. I'm going to bring it in as a composition and retain layer sizes. And this is going to be pretty big. This is a pretty big background. So one of the downsides with making your backgrounds so very large is that it will slow down After Effects. Like it's not going to be a really easy thing to work with. So that's important to remember when you are making ginormous backgrounds, that they will take considerable amount of time to render and it will slow down your workflow a little bit. I used to make the mistake of starting to space everything apart in the Z depth right now. I used to do this right away without even setting up my composition size and everything and thinking it would be okay. And it won't be okay. You really need to set up a camera right away, and you need to plan your camera, your lens type. So is it going to be a wide or a medium? I like to work to start with sort of an average size so that I can do a wide shot and like a really, really extreme close up with a long lens and still have the scene work. The size of your lens will actually affect everything. And I'll gradually show you why as we build the scene. It's too hard to demonstrate right now. But right now, this lens is too big. I'm going to go with a more of a standard size 50 millimeter lens, which is about 40 degrees for an angle of view. You could go a little wider if you really want to, but I'm going to go 50 for now. I tend to try to avoid super wide lenses because I get too much distortion. I used to use it because I thought it made things look deeper. The other problem with really, really wide lenses is it's really hard to get nice depth of field happening. And I really enjoy depth of field. I think it's a great storytelling tool. Okay, so it tells us we have a problem because we have no 3D layers. So I can essentially just go through here and enable every one of these 3D layers. Now what we can also start doing is color coding this as we go through. Oh, it looks like I forgot to name a layer. Let's just double check what layer that is. I'm just double clicking on it and it should pull open. Okay, this is a paper texture layer, so I'm just going to call this paper texture, and that's for the background sky. Now I made this sky and the background piece is smaller because they don't move very much. No matter how much you move your camera, they're really only going to stay one size. Actually, let's reduce this to half so we're not redrawing such a huge scene. And the very next step, you have to reduce the composition size. Actually, let's do this first. I'm going to duplicate this scene because I want to back up just to see roughly how the scene is laid out. Now, I never try to match it exactly to what I did in a picture. I consider coming into After Effects like your second kick at the can of trying to compose this in a more interesting way. Because the fact of the matter is once your camera starts moving, all of the scenes and pieces that you laid out so perfectly in Photoshop will be for naught, because as soon as that camera moves forward a little bit or moves to the side, everything shifts. So it's important to really embrace that depth and you don't want to try to preserve this one great drawing that you did, because it's more about the feeling of the scene than it is about the perfect layout. At least for me it is. I'm going to name this After Effects, and this is just going to be my backup. Backup, there we go. And this is the one I'm actually going to work with. And this is where things are going to change a little bit. So we're going to go from a very large composition to 1920 by 1080, just a standard high resolution. There we go. And I guess we could do 23976. Since we're trying to go for sort of a stop motion look, I'm going to go for a lower frame rate. Now you can see how difficult it will be to lay the scene out now because everything is hidden away. And so this is why I can have both of these open and I can jump back and forth to look at this to see roughly how things were positioned to get a sense of it. But the other thing I need to do is I need to bring my camera way back. Let's take this camera and let's move them way back because this is a very large scene. This scene is, the design of this scene is actually intended to cover a lot of camera movement. So I'm thinking that it's going to come all the way down from up high, come down, track along here, and find Rocket Randee looking out over the city. So there's a lot of camera movement that needs to happen in this actual scene. So I'm going to pull back. So now we have the scene back to where it was, but our camera is way far away. So let's just take a look at the custom view here. And I'm going to pull way back, and we're going to have a look at how far away that camera is. Very far away. We're quite a ways away from this scene. Let's go back into the camera. So as you can see, nothing's really changed. Everything's the same. So my first big step here, if you're very, very, very particular about having things fit where they were to begin with, it's very important to try to find a way to get your anchor points into the middle of the scene. And to do this, you can create a null object that is going to be essentially a scalar object that sits in the middle of the scene. 960, it's right here. And you can essentially, as you move through scaling up everything, you can parent them to this null object and scale this object up. I'm going to put this. So the reason this is important is when I take an object, sort of like, let's say, let's turn off all the sky stuff for now. If I have an object like the cityscape, for instance, and I have to push it way far back into the background. So let's put it at 50,000. So it's way far back. Now if I scale it up, it just scales up as the city sitting in the center of itself. this is all well and good, but one of the problems with this is that if I wanted it to end up exactly where it was, so let's just take a photograph here. If I push it way back 50,000, oops, 50, 1, 2, 3, it's way back, and I try to scale it up, I'm going to have to try to match it to that other photo wherever it was before. So the really nice thing about actually having a null object like this is we can go up and grab this null object, and you can have a ton of them if you want. I mean, I don't usually work this way, but I just sort of figured this out as a way to keep things together if you're really concerned about it. So parent the city to the scalar. Now the scalar's in the middle of the scene. Then we position the scalar. Oh, let's make it 3D. Now we're going to position the scalar way deep into the background, so 50,000. Okay, and the city came with it. Now, when I scale the city back up again, I can scale it from the center of the composition and get it back to where it was in its original position and make everything fit. So it's another way to work to sort of keep things centered if you really want to hang on to the composition that you had. So I don't personally care about the composition I had that much because I'm going to make this a whole bunch better. So I'm not necessarily going to use this thing. So first things first, let's start with the far background objects, and then I'll gradually move forward and fill up the scene. You could go the opposite way as well. It's really up to you. I usually like to start with the way far back. Okay, so I'm going to position this back at 50,000. And we're going to get sky. Okay, normally I like to set the sky first and put it way far back. So for this color gradient, like this base color here, I'm not really worried about that. That doesn't even actually have to be 3D. That can just be a regular 2D layer. In fact, I may actually trade this for just a regular fill layer. So if I go new, I can create a new fill, like a new solid, and then I'll just eyedropper that color. And this just makes it one less thing for After Effects to have to process when we're rendering. So I can have one less object in there that's really large that it has to think about. The next thing is this actual gradient. This gradient, I will keep it 3D, and I'm going to put it way far back because if the camera tilts up or down, I want the gradient to move naturally. So this is going to go way back. So 100, 1, 2, 3, 100,000. Don't be afraid to use really big numbers when you're positioning your objects, because the further away things are, the more natural it's actually going to look, then the more believable it's going to be. So let's see if I can see that object. There it is. There, it's way back there. So there we go. So as you can see, that sky is pretty far away. The big question that I'm trying to figure out though is how realistic do I want this to be? Like, do I want this to feel like an actual place, or do I want it to feel like a little paper set? So that's another problem. That's another question I need to answer, because if I want it to feel like a little set, I don't want everything so far away. Like I want things a little bit closer together. So that's something I really do need to consider before building this whole scene together. So if I want it to have kind of a stop motion look, like I'm on a little set, then it's probably more important that my sky and everything else is actually not super far away, because you subconsciously pick up on those details. So I'm not 100% sure. I'm not 100% sure at this point. But see, the thing is, if I am going to do that, it means my distances need to be less exaggerated. Like they actually need to be quite small, and I need to have more of a natural setup. So like my city can't be super far away to look really distant. It needs to be kind of close, but just small. So it really comes down to, am I trying to create a believable world, or am I trying to create a basic stop motion set? And I'm on the fence about that. So for now, I'm going to put this sky at 70,000. And then maybe what I'll do with the actual city here is I'll bring that a lot closer. So maybe I'll put that at 30,000. So that'll be there. Okay. And then we can just sort of play with it until we get the right look. So let's go into the camera. So you can see as I move things, there is sort of a dimensionality starting to happen here. Okay, so let's move into the paper texture. Now the paper texture, I should have probably just parented to the actual gradient fill. So let's just go call this sky grad. And I'm just going to copy the position, paste it, and then copy the scale and paste that. And then I'll just take the position, parent it to sky grad, and then bring it off -10, just so it's not sitting right on top of each other, because sometimes you can get flickering with objects that are 3D, especially once you start adding shadows and things like that. So then we have all our clouds and everything. And the clouds, I think what I'll do is I'll parent them all to the first cloud right here. And I'm going to put these clouds way back. I'm going to put them just off of the surface, so about 60, maybe 65,000. So they'll be just off the surface of the actual sky. And so let's just scale these guys way up. And I don't have, like, these clouds are a little broken because the edge is cut off on these ones. So I need to decide how I'm going to be using them before I get too far into everything. Okay, so we can just take a look and see how all of this is scaling up. Now, really, what I'm going to do is literally rebuild this scene. So I don't need my pieces to be perfectly placed or anything. I really just want to scale them up. And like I said, if you do want your pieces to be really perfectly placed, just use this scalar object and make sure whenever you're going to be using it that you recenter it and scale it back down to 100. So it's always in the middle of the scene and it's scaled at 100. So, all right, so maybe I'm going to turn the sun off for now. Well, actually, let's put the sun way back there too, though. So that'll be back at, we'll put this at 69,000, because that'll be right against, see, we're not too far. We're not too far away from the gradient layer, so we want to be just on top of it. And we'll scale this up. Again, I'm not quite sure how big we need it right now. But we're going to use that. That's more for reference because I want to actually use a lens flare or something for this. Okay, so let's do, we have city 4, city 3. Okay, and then I'm going to parent these lights onto these buildings here and then also give these distinct colors so that I don't forget that these two are linked together. Orange. Okay, city 3, city 4. Now, this is, I guess, one of those situations where I can link all these together, so I can parent these to the scalar. And I'm going to take city 4 off the scalar. And we're going to take the scalar and we'll position it way back to about, let's put it to 25,000. Okay. Now, if you want, you can take a snapshot here. Put this back to 25,000. Let's turn this guy on so we can see it. And then just start scaling it up until it's in the right place. We're almost there. So you can see I've like maintained the integrity of all those objects and how they were organized. So then let's we can keep them parented for now. I think this guy's probably too small. So let's just take them off the scalar. So we're at 148%. Okay, so let's go 30, this one's at 30,000. This should probably be at 125. Maybe let's just put it to 150. Just scale it up. Again, I'm going to refill this out and make the city look the way I want it to look. The next thing I want to throw back there is we'll get the haze and the hill. I'm not going to worry about the haze right now, but we'll definitely get this way far back hill. So let's get these guys off of the scalar object. Put the scalar back at 0. And let's grab the hill and the haze. So these two guys, parent them to the scalar. Let's take a picture again. And we'll position this one at 20,000. Okay, so at 20,000, I think our cities were at, that one's at 30. These guys are at 25. That might be too far back. We might need to be more at 15,000 for this hill. Okay, so now what we can do is turn this guy on and have a look and scale this up until it's sitting in the right place. Almost right. I'd say that's close enough. Great. Let's unparent these two. None, and then we can put the hill 2 onto that guy. Well, first we have to put him back down to 100% and put the position back to 0. And so there's hill 2. And hill 2, we're going to put much closer than hill 3. Well, maybe we'll put it at 10,000. And let's scale that up. Oh, we should probably take a picture first. So position 10, 1, 2, 3. And then let's just have a look at this. Scale it up. Bigger. Smaller. There you go. Good enough. Let's take the parenting off of this one. Bring up this guy. Bring it up here. And then we'll do hill number 1. And let's get the, let's put this one back to 0. Put the scalar back to 0 and the scale down to 100. Parent this guy to the scalar and we'll reposition him. So keeping in mind hill 2, we'll put this one at, let's put it at 5,000. Okay, so that hill's fairly close. And then, oops, we should take a picture first. So 5,000. And let's scale that up. Scale it slightly up. Scale it down just a bit. There we go. Okay, so let's unparent this guy. Great. So right now, our furthest away hill object is 5,000. That's actually not that far. But what we can start seeing is, if we move our camera, we'll start getting a sense of the depth that's happening. We could probably go even further at this point. Could probably space things out even more. If we were to take a look at the custom view, you're just going to start getting a sense of how things are spaced out. So the next thing I'm going to do really quickly is we're going to go into camera 1 and just finish spacing out the city pieces. I didn't want to do each one so specifically as that I had to do them one at a time. So this will be 22, 1, 2, 3. Because I don't really mind. I want to reposition them anyways. So city 3, let's put city 3 there. And then let's grab this one here. Put this position, and we'll put this one at 20,000. Because our next hill is at 15. So we're okay if that's at 20,000. And it's going to be kind of large. We want to make it look good. We're going to put that. Okay, so I'm just going to position this until it looks good. Now I don't want to lose all my nice little gaps where you can see in between them. So I want to maintain a little bit of that, even though they'll change and shift a little bit. City 3. Let's find city 4. Now, what I could do is actually use a couple of these city 4s and actually duplicate this and just have a couple of them going on, which will help make the city look a little more expansive. Maybe this one can be at 35,000. Bring it down a bit. And then maybe scale it up. Move it over. Now, right now, they don't seem to have much depth. Like they all kind of look like they're stacked on top of each other. So that's where the haze and the background color come into play. What I usually like to do is take the sky gradient. We'll make a new one. We're duplicating it. And then I like to put it up here. And I actually do create new layers for them. Like they stay 3D. And then I'll put it just above. So this will be at 29,000. And it'll go just in front. Scale it way down. And right now, this is a multiplied layer. We need just this to be normal. So we'll do a normal. Put the transparency down to something like 5. And I want to also make sure that I don't change the color of the sky too much. So knowing that, let's put this back to 100%. And let's just darken this a little bit until it matches more the actual gradient colors of the sky. Because right now it's way too bright. So we could just take our levels. We could probably use curves as well. Just bring this down. There we go. Okay. Not quite right. Let's go in here. We just darkened it too much. Okay. Blending mode. Normal. Okay. Put its transparency to 10. I just want to make sure that I'm not brightening the sky too much. Position this over. Now these you have to be really careful with, because if you pull your camera back too far, you'll expose them, and then you'll lose the illusion that you're creating. So you either want to scale them a lot up to the sides, or you can scale them up significantly, because it's more just to get the color of the sky in there, because there's going to be more of them. So I'm going to give this a very particular color. Maybe we'll give it a fuchsia color. And then I'll duplicate this out, and then we'll add another one. Whoops, that happened. We'll add another one. And this one's going to be at, the city's at 53,000. We'll bring this one. I want this city to be below this city 4, which is at 30,000. That's at 29. Actually, let's put this one here. We want this one to be at 52,000. There we go. Scale it up. Okay. And then the next one, we'll create another one. And this one's going to be at 24,000. Okay. So what this is gradually going to start doing is it's going to create some haze between our buildings. 21, 1, 2, 3. And I actually even use this for the, scale it down. We can always scale it up later. And you can even change it. If you find that you want your haze to be a different tint or a different color, you can change it. Use whatever you want. This one will be at 19,000. Okay, so it's really starting to push those cities back, and this is like this is really common when you're working on miniature sets, that you actually use a fog machine to add atmosphere. So we've got that haze we're going to want to work with, but I also want to push this hill further back. So let's put this one to 14,000. Okay, and this is going to help push that hill back, which was definitely too dark. There's a couple of these hills that are definitely way too dark. We can adjust them manually as well without just using an atmosphere effect, because it's starting to get pretty heavy. Like the air is getting pretty thick now, and it might be too thick. Let's put this one at 9,000. What I usually do is, as I'm getting closer, I reduce the opacity of it. So right now we're at 10. I'll put it down to 5, and I actually feel it out and go back and forth between my layers and figure out how strong I really need it. So if I find it's building up too much, I'll lower it down on everybody and then gradually build up to my 10%. But you can see I've created quite a bit of depth with that, and I haven't had to change the colors of anything, and I haven't had to like muck around too much. So it's given me what I need. It's giving me this hazy look. Now, if I wanted it to be crisper and have more of an atmospheric look, so let's just turn these off really quick, and you can see without. There's without it, and there's with it. If you want more of a crisp look, what you can do is change the color a little bit. So you could do a tint on it for one thing if you want. You do a tint and actually grab, let's just grab a sky color here. Let's push this closer to a blue and increase the saturation on that. Isolate that layer and make sure it's actually working. So we've got now this sky color and it goes down to a white. So what you could do is you could just take this, copy that, and then just paste that onto all of these sky layers. And you're going to get a much cooler, more of a cool effect. So it's kind of up to you. I mean, you could do both. I'm going to stick with this color for now. The other option you have is moving them after you've positioned them. If you move them up or down, you'll get a shift in the actual gradient colors because it is a gradient. So if you want more of the sunset colors, you can go in here in this area and then just scale them up as need be once we get the camera moves sorted out. Because once the camera's moving, we are going to encounter the edges of those. But what we will be doing is going in after and making sure after we've done our camera move that everything's scaled appropriately so that we aren't losing our scaling. The other thing I might want to do here is space a couple of those city layers a little further apart. So for instance, let's put this guy put this one at 35,000. Scale it up a bit. And then we'll put this at 34,000. It takes a little bit. It takes a bit of playing around to get things right. And then I'm going to put this one at 30,000. I want that to feel a little further away. Right now, as I'm moving the camera back, as I'm dollying it in and out, I'm feeling like the city pieces are a little too close together, especially the closer city ones, the ones with the lights. So this city's at 30, so let's put this at 29,000. So what I should be able to do here is put this at 25,000. And that should make a significant difference. Give us some depth. Because I want to feel the cities like spaced apart. And right now I'm getting more of the feeling that these are so close together. Maybe we'll put this at 27,000. Okay. Paste it over there. And maybe we'll put this one at, our furthest back city is at 53. So let's put this one at, put it at 40. 1, 2, 3. Scale it up. Move it over. Okay. And then the next one, I think was at 40. So we'll put this one, let's put him at 35. Scale it up a little bit. Position him around. That's 35,000. Now this one can be 30. Scale it up. I want to move these guys over a bit. There. Okay. And then let's just fix these sky layers. So that one's okay. This one here, this sky layer here should be at 39,000. I want to scale it up. The next one we want to be at 34,000. And then scale it up. And I'm just scaling them so they're all roughly the same size. This one's at 30,000, so this one can be at 29. We'll scale it up. And then city ones, it's still at 20,000. So this one will stay at 19. This one should be scaled up a little more. There. So You can see we're starting to get a lot of nice depth in that city. And I might just move these up a bit. All right, so I think I'm just gonna save this, and we'll do some more later. In the next lesson, I'll continue to build the scene and work with the colors and spacing things apart and adding some atmosphere and depth to the actual composition. And at the end of that video, I do actually encounter the camera error, so keep it in mind to be ready for it. But everything does still apply. Everything that I'm demonstrating will still work for you as long as you're using a wider lensed camera. If you like what e.d.films is doing and want to stay up to date on the latest developments and tutorials, please show your support by liking us on Facebook.